Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and like I said, today I am actually getting around to uploading my soapbox on Medicare for All single payer and specifically Elizabeth Warren's plan. Um, Now, before I do, I just want to say thank y'all for all your support. It means a lot to me. And if you're not already, subscription really helps. And of course, likes and comments on every video help a tremendous amount. It helps boost my viewership and gets me out to a wider audience. And, lots of links will be down in the description. Basically, the links to both of my models as well as my Patreon page. So if you actually like the content that much and are over 18, consider a quick donation. I would appreciate it for sure. Um, like I said, the other day I've got some extra content that I'm tempted to record slash release. Played a few Cards Against Humanity games. I may not upload every single one of those, but I will probably upload a few if y'all want me to. Same thing with trying to start a series with a game called The Political Process, where you basically run for election and you progress through the game by going for bigger and bigger offices, but you also have to enact public policy at each level, so you're not just running for office. Um, anyway, let's get on to this actual topic: single payer universal health care, and specifically Medicare for all. And we're going to be talking mostly about Warren's because hers is pretty much the most fleshed out one. And let's talk about why the United States doesn't have it. Well, the reason why we haven't had it is because there's been no real majority push, and most people thought of it as a kooky idea, as a radical far left idea, and socialist idea, or even communist idea during the Cold War era. And before that, no one really even thought it was a thing. No one actually understood that healthcare was a thing, especially when it came to insurance. But that really stunted the ability for desire for it to move, right? And to get it off the ground, whereas some nations have had it since the 30s, or even before then. I guess it's not really good for me to say that, considering I can't say the 20s now because I'm going to be talking about this decade if I say that. So, since the 1920s or 30s, and of course, Germany has had a vaguely similar system since the 1800s, thanks to Otto von Bismarck, um, who, while a conservative, even by today's, especially by today's standards, implemented a lot of social welfare programs in order to prevent the rise of communism, because he saw that as a greater threat than a few social welfare programs that he didn't like or agree with. He saw communism as a greater threat to Germany than bad public policy, at least in his eyes. So, he was willing to cave for that, and some people say, well, why not do the same here? Well, the thing is, we have a lot of different things, and it probably won't change the cost of anything. And I'll get to that in a second. The second reason is America's always been to the right of the rest of the world, especially economically, and probably a little bit culturally, with a few exceptions. Um, you'll notice that America has never been big on the welfare state, that we've always maintained a very free market system, despite the increase in regulations. And of course, our government has always been slightly less powerful in terms of ability to enact policy compared to other nations. In terms of global power we wield, that's mostly military, and we've always had a strong military, even back in the days where we were still fighting for our independence, we pride ourselves on our military prowess. Especially after the War of Independence and the fact we technically fought Britain to a draw in the War of 1812. Some people will write it as a loss, but we achieved all of our aims with that war, so I count it as a draw, even though militarily you could definitely count it as a loss. We achieved our goals, which is enough for me to say, yeah, that's a draw. Um, and of course, after that, we haven't lost a declared war, and in terms of actual battlefield action, we haven't lost a war. Whereas we've failed miserably on our goals and our aims in a lot of conflicts, such as Vietnam and the Second Gulf War. But anyway, moving back towards the actual topic on hand, let's talk a little bit about why I don't think this plan is a good idea, specifically Warren's. We don't know exactly what Americans spend on healthcare, but it's probably in the trillions of dollars each year, and the government contributes a decent amount to that. But it certainly isn't 5.5 trillion per year. Um, Warren's plan averages out to about 5.5 trillion a year, which would be added on to the federal budget. Now, that may sound like, okay, what does that number really mean? Well, our current federal budget, that means military spending, healthcare spending, education spending, welfare, food stamps, social security, that sort of stuff, and, the science budget, so NASA, NOAA, all these other organizations. Basically, the entire federal government spends about 3.5 trillion a year, somewhere in that ballpark, and we take in approximately 2.75 trillion in taxes. So we maintain between a 500 billion dollar and a 750 billion dollar deficit. So Warren's plan basically amounts to more than doubling the federal budget. It actually comes close to tripling the federal budget. Each year it exists. So that's expensive. You're not going to pay for that just by cutting military spending. You're not going to pay for that just by increasing taxation on the rich, who already pay 95% of the federal tax revenue. Yeah, exactly. And that's the wealthiest 1%. So you're going to have to bite the bullet and admit you're going to be taxing the middle classes and even the lower classes at significantly higher rates to even come close to affording this. And you're still going to wind up coming up short unless you start adding value added taxes and increasing the corporate tax rate and maybe instituting a federal property tax. I don't know. And the wealth tax certainly won't cover enough, because the people who qualify to be taxed under that Warren's wealth tax, it doesn't add up. The math doesn't add up. And I'm not just against this because I'm being a fiscal hawk here and saying, we legitimately cannot afford this. I mean, I'm not saying we can afford the wars we're getting ourselves into, but this is more expensive than those. Significantly more expensive than those. And it won't affect quality of care. It won't affect the price of care. And it really won't provide for greater economic opportunity for Americans, because they're going to be taxed more than what they gain in order to pay for this stupid system. So it's actually going to probably worsen the economic mobility of America's middle class. And that's all to pay for a vanity project that people don't really understand what it's going to do. And I think it's going to be a really unpopular plan if you explain what it means to unions, especially the union leadership, because they're able to get their people motivated because they know how to communicate to their members. Basically, what her plan is to replace. She may call it a public option, but long term, they want to replace your healthcare with a government-run system, which is going to be worse because they're going to go to the lowest bidder. Whoever's going to provide healthcare at the lowest price, they're going to go with, meaning that's going to decrease quality. And a lot of these unions have fought tooth and nail to get decent, if not really good, healthcare options for their workers who are quite happy with these plans. A lot of them are very happy with their healthcare, and they don't want to get rid of it for a government system. Now, part of that is the culture of America. We just don't trust government, period. But also part of that is a lot of these plans are actually pretty good. They're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they work. So let's go to the crux of why I don't think this is. Let's go to the crux of why I don't think it will improve the quality of care. Mostly because we are at the limit of how quality our care can be. We see patients extremely quickly, especially when compared to the rest of the world. We make sure that procedures are carried out as best as they can, which is great. And lastly, the only realistic way to improve the quality of care is to advance medical science 50 years. And that's not happening overnight. That's going to take 50 years. And we are going to remain at the pinnacle of medical science. So you're not going to improve there. Let's move on to why it won't reduce costs. Well, number one, nowhere in the world, and I can't find the article anymore, but it was there at one point. It was a brilliant article where they actually compared the entire OECD, which I think the U.S. is the only nation there that doesn't have a single payer system. And they found that no nation had reduced healthcare costs simply by switching to single payer. Most had price controls for prescription drugs and certain medical procedures implemented as well, price ceilings on these. And that would work even if you don't switch to a single payer system. And even then, the amount of cost reduction is minimal at best, because you can't reduce the cost to the point where hospitals don't profit off of them. You could, but the hospital would actually wind up going out of business by that point. Like, they would actually shut down because they couldn't afford to keep the lights on. And that would be not good. That would reduce the quality of care. And the reason why you can't reduce it below the operating costs and you have to allow some sort of profit is because a lot of the technology that we have for medical care here in the States, we have to source extremely rare parts and elements and materials. They have to be built, they have to be maintained, and you have to have qualified people to operate them. And of course you have to keep them, powered. And making sure you have qualified people to operate them is a whole new level of cost, because you have nurses who have to go through, a full 4-year degree and have to get certified and have to have, a certain amount of an internship or some sort of, on the spot, on the job training. You have nurses assistants who have to have a decent level of education and also have to be certified and trained at the site. You have doctors who have to spend, at least 8 to 12 years going through and getting their medical degree. And then they have to spend years in a residency learning about what they're going to do. And oftentimes they'll specialize after that, which requires even more schooling. So yeah, you can imagine how much money goes into just making sure they're qualified, and they have to get paid at the other end of that. And they have to get paid top dollar. Because if they don't, well, people just aren't going to become doctors, first of all. And second of all, they won't be able to afford to live if they aren't, considering most of them have to go into a decent amount of debt in order to get their degrees and their training. So, yeah. And that doesn't even, cover that, Warren and a lot of the other Democrats also want to make college tuition free for the student. Again, that's going to be paid through their taxes later, and they're going to wind up paying even more than they would have if they took out student loans for the entire thing through taxation, provided they get a good enough job. If they don't, they're still going to get taxed heavily. And, of course, forgiving all the student loan debt, which cuts off some of the United States government's income stream, aka revenue, meaning you're reducing that 2.5 trillion dollar revenue stream. Yes, you're going to be making up for it somewhat through additional taxation, but you're losing a revenue stream by forgiving all that debt. So basically, this plan. Oh yeah, and of course we have individual rooms, which means you have to have a copy of all that medical hardware. So we would need to switch to communal rooms, which would cost a ton of money in order to switch all our medical buildings and our hospitals over to that. So you're going to be increasing costs. You're going to increase costs during this switch in order to try and reduce costs. So you're going to have a massive upfront investment if you want to try and make this somewhat work financially, and even then it's not going to, simply because you have so much overhead that you have to clear. So we're going to continuously go into deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper debt, and at some point it's just not sustainable. And I'm not trying to bash this idea like it's like they want to make it, like they want to bring down America, because they don't. They genuinely want the best for our people here in the States. But when I think about it, it's like, it just doesn't sound like something a smart person would do. And it seems, it really, the best analogy I can think of for this is basically basically single payer healthcare here in the States is the equivalent of buying a timeshare. It's that bad of an idea that I think it's a timeshare. So, everybody who knows anything about finance says never purchase a timeshare. Well, that's where I stand on this, and I just don't see it as a good idea. I see it as a terrible idea that is just unsustainable, especially considering the size of America and the amount of population growth we're going to have. And we wouldn't see any real economic benefit from this. We wouldn't see social and economic mobility, and we wouldn't really see an improvement in the quality of life for our citizens. The only real difference is we're going to see a decrease in the disposable income of our citizens. A significant decrease. And I don't see that as a good way to not only attract voters, but I just don't see that as a good way to promote prosperity. Instead, the best way to do that is to stop taxing the shit out of our citizens, even at the expense of getting rid of some social programs because at the end of the day, if you increase each individual's disposable income, they're going to be able to use it on things that they need or even want. And if they have more disposable income, they're going to purchase more, which is going to require increased production, which means more people get hired, and that means more jobs get created. You actually see economic growth in that instance because people wind up getting paid more, and the cycle continues. It's a positive feedback loop. Now, of course, that is the theory of why you want to cut spending and taxation. But you definitely don't want to do the opposite, which is to increase taxation, especially for this, because like I said, you're not going to get away with just taxing the rich. You're going to have to tax the middle classes heavily, and you're even going to have to tax the lower classes a lot more in order to even come close to affording this. So that's kind of where I stand. Wish everyone a nice day. Remember, like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and have a nice day. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy. Bye.